PT is widely regarded as one of, if not the biggest what-ifs in gaming history, as a playable teaser for the later cancelled game Silent Hills. The comments of any even vaguely PT-related content contained thousands of people lamenting what could have been, as well as how amazing and terrifying the game is. Now this is completely reasonable, seeing how the teaser itself is only 30 minutes long with a walkthrough, and how difficult it is to actually play. Seeing how the game got delisted a little over 8 months after release, it's virtually impossible to play unless you either play a fan recreation ranging in quality, or a clone which attempts to capture what PT would look like as a full game, also ranging in quality.
This is supposed to be a scary game.
People who haven't even played the game continue to this day to rave about it, but would it be this way if it were still available? This is a complicated question, and to answer it we first need to know what the intentions were when it got delisted, how the gameplay itself would be looked at if it were still available, and how the legacy of the game would change if it were still available. At this point, most people know the commonly accepted reason why Silent Hills was cancelled and why PT was delisted, but here's a small history lesson for those who don't. Skip to this point if you already know. PT was developed by Hideo Kojima and his team, Kojima Productions, as a subsidiary of the company Konami, who owned the Silent Hill IP. There had been drama between Kojima and the other higher-ups of the company, as he had spent millions to develop the Fox engine being used on Metal Gear Solid 5 and the upcoming Silent Hills, as those projects were looking to make less money than they were making on mobile games and slot machines, meaning they were putting in a high investment for what looked like a low return. It was easy to see this was a fad to everyone else, but Konami fired Kojima shortly after the release of PT, making Metal Gear Solid 5 the final game he would develop for Konami. It's been debated as to whether or not Konami knew about PT's development, as well as if PT is actually about Kojima's relationship with Konami, but that's irrelevant to this video at least. What's important is that Konami strongly disliked Kojima, and did everything they could to wipe his vision for the Silent Hill franchise from everyone's memory, or at least that's what it looks like. The most obvious reason for PT's delisting is that Konami didn't want to be associated with Kojima, and wanted to move into the mobile game space. At first glance, this makes perfect sense, but when considering the popularity of PT and how Konami still refuses to acknowledge it even after their venture into microtransactions and mobile games failed, another explanation comes up. This one is kind of a conspiracy theory, but it definitely has some merit. It is entirely possible that Konami delisted PT with the intent of keeping people talking about the brand and being able to capitalize off of that with new Kojima-less Silent Hill games. This also isn't a perfect theory, as the series lay dormant for almost a decade after the release of PT, and now that it is back, the new products are facing pretty severe criticism, even from the ones that would be considered easy crowd pleasers. As for what the most realistic reason for PT's delisting is, it's most likely a combination of Kojima's exit and keeping brand interest, with the initial reasoning being interpersonal, but the reason for their ignoring of Silent Hills and PT being to string fans along through the possibility of Kojima secretly coming back and keeping people invested in the brand. Obviously this isn't going to happen, but every time any game showcase or even Silent Hill event occurs, there's a small but vocal group of people spamming the comments about how Silent Hills is going to be revealed, thus keeping the brand alive. The delisting of PT would mean nothing if the game itself weren't good, and it's pretty commonly accepted at this point that PT is one of, if not the best horror experiences of all time. But how can this be measured if it's nearly impossible to play a legitimate copy? There's always the option of playing a fan remake, but these ultimately fail to capture the mystery that makes the game so terrifying. All of the mystery and variability is gone. Some barely work, and others include full guides on how to beat them, but the largest loss is the sense that you don't know what's going to happen, especially in the final loop. In the final loop of PT, it's commonly accepted that the goal is to get the baby to laugh twice, but it's almost impossible to decipher how to get this to work. Some people speak into their microphones attached to their DualShock controllers, others just stand still. Techniques work and stop working at what seems like random times. This gives it the sense that you, as the player or observer if you're watching a playthrough, are truly helpless. There's no 100% working guide to solve it. Now, there obviously is a way to solve it, or a reason some people can't, but due to the scarcity of the game, it's likely this will never be found. This begs the question, if the game were still available, would it be as scary? Through nitpicking through every file and line of code, would it lose the sense of mystery in the gameplay? First of all, I'd argue it wouldn't, as booting up the game deprives you of so much information and context that even if you know exactly what's going to happen before it does, the atmosphere and mystery around the story alone are enough to make the game work. Second of all, I'd argue the game has been nitpicked as much, if not more, than most other games at this point. Lance McDonald has a couple videos showing some secret parts of PT the player isn't supposed to see, but these almost have the opposite effect of what one would think. With most horror games, looking behind the curtain shows that what you're seeing isn't real and various things that make it seem fake. If this is applied to PT, it makes it more real to look behind this curtain. Things like Lisa walking outside of the bathroom door when the player has no way to see her jump scaring the player for looking out of bounds and subsequently falling through the map, and the infamous sequence where she follows behind the player, something the player can almost sense but can never see directly. This dissection of PT has not made it any worse in any way, as most answers people were looking for were not found when cutting into the corpse of the game, but rather more questions. I could talk about the pure game of PT for hours, looking into every story aspect, gameplay element, model, texture, etc. But at the end of the day, no matter how much the game is looked into, answers are never going to be found, because they're simply not there. I'm sure there's a rabbit hole of content that either wasn't released to the public or is still hidden in the game's files, but at the end of the day, none of these are going to remind the player it's just a game, aside from the occasional model swap or goofy animation. The fact that it's not common knowledge and knowing that still not everything has been found definitely adds to the experience, as well as the general mystery surrounding the game. It's hard to deny that the delisting of PT was a bad decision, but the quality of the game is at a point where whether or not it can be picked into does not really affect how well it can scare the player. If anything, the delisting adds a sense of mystery and vagueness that remakes and clones can't really compete with. Various games later attempted to recreate the lightning in a bottle popularity of the game, to varying degrees of success. Games like Visage were a so-so experience that offered some cool scares, and games like Layers of Fear 2, Layers of Fear VR, and Layers of Fear tried to cash in on the hype that the game created. What I'm getting at is, if PT were never delisted, would these games exist, and would the game's legacy be as huge as it is now? There are two possible scenarios in which this question works. One is a scenario where Silent Hills is not released, but PT stays on the PlayStation Store, and one where Silent Hills is released. In the scenario where Silent Hills is not released, but PT stays on the store for a free download, I'd argue its legacy and impact on the creation of other games stays pretty much the same, maybe with a few tweaks. If Silent Hills were to be released though, I doubt any of these games would be released or get nearly as much recognition. The sole reason most people bought these games, myself included, is to fill a Silent Hills shaped hole in them, and without that they don't really have much merit on their own, aside from a couple of these games. With that said, judging these games as if they were equals is kind of unfair. PT has the advantage of being almost a piece of lost media, a living urban legend. I'd argue the delisting of PT has made its legacy much larger than it would be otherwise. What would be a really cool experience that makes you buy a couple adult diapers and a nightlight turn into something different, almost like the tape from The Ring. This definitely improves how it was viewed from the outside, and watching footage of it feels like watching something you're not supposed to, especially with the various fourth wall breaks.
Two zero four eight 63. 2048 63. 2048 63. 2048 63. 2048
With the future of Silent Hill looking grim and Konami going to great lengths to act like Hideo Kojima doesn't exist, it's pretty difficult to look back at PT with any feeling other than disappointment and sadness. It's similar to the fetus you find crying in the game, undeveloped and serving as a reminder of how it could have been something more. I'd argue this isn't fully accurate, as the game itself serves more as a symbol than a genuine game at this point. It's something to strive for, and something that still makes viewers need to buy new underwear after experiencing, even if it's through a weird knockoff. This isn't the best outcome for the franchise, but it's definitely a unique one. No other game really has had the impact PT has on the industry, so while it's not perfect, PT's scarcity definitely helped elevate the game to something new and different.
I could do nothing but walk. And then I saw me walking in front of myself. But it wasn't really me. Watch out. The gap in the door. It's a separate reality. The only me is me. Are you sure the only you is you?